The seventh foundation, framing and adaptability. The seventh foundation of emotional manipulation is where you finally take advantage of the position you have put your subject in. Through state control, you prevented them from taking control of the unconscious realm and took control of this by controlling their emotions. With your sensory acuity, you gathered all the intelligence about the subject that you could. You will find that sensory acuity is particularly important in adaptability because your senses tell you when you need to change your own behavior based on your subjects. Without good sensory acuity, you may not even notice when it is necessary to adapt to a new situation. Unconscious communication is more important for the step that comes before framing and adaptability, imitation. You imitate their unconscious cues of communication to get into your unconscious. By the time you're into the seventh foundation of emotional manipulation, unconscious communication should no longer be your biggest focus. It has already done its job. The fourth and fifth foundations, neuroscience and psychology, are both pertinent to the seventh foundation because they inform you about how to adapt to the situation. Without a strong base of understanding for these subjects, you won't have the social acumen to adapt properly to what your subject is doing. Finally, the sixth foundation of imitation is what makes framing and adaptability possible. Through imitation, we put the subject at ease and cause them to incorporate us into their psyche. That brings us to the last foundation of emotional manipulation. Before explaining the two sides to the seventh foundation, we must make something clear. This is the foundation where you use one of the manipulation techniques found in this book, as NLP teaches us to use them. Now, bear in mind that all these other foundations exist for a reason. You can't expect to succeed in emotional manipulation by only using these techniques without a strong theoretical grasp of neuro-linguistic programming. You can try to use the techniques, but you won't be able to find much success in them. All of these foundations must be in place for your manipulation to be effective. With that said, let's make sure we understand the two sides to the seventh foundation. That is, the two sides to correctly using one of the manipulation techniques in this book. The first of the two sides is framing. Framing is our goal when using a manipulation technique, but it is also an art form. When we say it is your goal, we mean that when you create a frame that works, you make the subject believe in the truth as you proclaim it to be. But you need to be familiar with the subtlety of this proclamation. You can't make it seem as though you are making a bold proclamation and that you just want them to agree with you. In fact, this is a surefire way to turn them off the idea you want them to espouse. Instead, you need to make it believable that you want the subject to have to seem like a natural truth. This is the art of framing. The very moment you are explicitly trying to make the subject believe what you want them to believe, your framing has already failed. Remember, NLP is not about debate. It is not about conversation. NLP depends on your ability to portray the outside world as if you see it objectively, as if it can be no other way, as if it is impossible for anything other than what you are saying, proclaiming to be true. This is why it's called framing. You aren't interested in convincing them of what you believe. You are interested in making them believe that the world objectively exists as you want them to see it. There is an important distinction. Framing requires you to paint a picture of the world that seems objective and unbiased. When you frame things the right way, you make the subject believe that the way you proclaim things to be is the absolute truth and that it is nonsense for anything else to be true. Convincing implies the subject knows their alternative views from the one you want them to believe, and with effective framing, they stop seeing these alternative views as a possibility. Mind control and behavior manipulation are not truly any different as far as the foundations of emotional manipulation go. For both, You want to change the subject's ideas about the world in a way that benefits you. When you mind control them, you cause them to have the beliefs you want them to have. When you manipulate someone's behavior, you are still framing the truth in a way that leads the subject to espouse certain beliefs. But these beliefs are ones that give the subject incentive to take on the behaviors you want them to take on. The second side of the seventh foundation is adaptability. Adaptability is what makes the difference between an emotional manipulator who can only influence easy subjects and one who can influence anyone they like. That's because you may have a perfect plan of action for changing someone's unconscious, but things don't always go as planned. You may misunderstand something about the subject that leads you to approach the technique the wrong way. You may suddenly become aware of an emotion the subject is going through that completely changes their mental state. Whatever the case, it is actually quite rare for the way you see things at first to be the full picture of the subject's mind. Because of this, your adaptability is vital to emotionally manipulating them. While the framing part of the seventh foundation is the theoretical side of the techniques contained in this book, adaptability is where all the foundations we have gone over come into play. You need proper state control, because when the subject starts expressing an emotion you didn't see coming, you can't let them trap you into feeling it with them. That would make you lose control of the situation. You need solid sensory acuity because this will clue you in on whether something is about to change in the subject's attitudes. The slightest change in their voice or their facial expression can tell you if the dynamics of your interaction with them are about to change. Without solid sensory acuity, you won't be able to do well in the adaptability portion of the seventh foundation. The third foundation comes in handy for adaptability in how it works in tandem with sensory acuity. You may be able to accurately take in the basic information of what unconscious cues of communication the subject is giving you, but this doesn't necessarily mean you are interpreting them correctly. As we've said, the more you learn about the specific meanings of the cues, the less you will need the third foundation to do it consciously, but there is a long road for you to take before you reach that point. The fourth foundation of neuroscience is one that should give you hope in adaptability. It should give you hope because you are aware of neuroplasticity. When you know that the brain is constantly changing, it changes your perspective on NLP and emotional manipulation. Someone might seem like they are not susceptible to NLP at all in the beginning, but the more you adapt to the unconscious signals they are giving you, the more and more susceptible they will become. They are only human after all, and the more you move them ever so slightly towards being your ally, the closer you are to using mind control or manipulation on them. Psychology is by far the most important thing for you to learn to be adaptable as a manipulator. There are simply some concepts that will keep you from influencing some people unless you know them. Thankfully, this book is filled with psychological concepts from beginning to end. Even when we aren't explicitly talking about psychology itself, psychology forms the underpinnings of the neuro-linguistic programming. It is what allows us to apply neuroscience to our real lives, which is exactly what we want to do in emotional manipulation. Essentially, the 7 foundations take up so much of our time because adaptability is the most important thing you can learn as an NLP manipulator. And unless you understand all 7 foundations, like the back of your hand, you can't adapt to changes in the social situation. You might not believe it, but by this point in the book, you are at least an intermediate level in emotional manipulation. By knowing much more than almost anyone knows about NLP, you can take advantage of these forbidden truths about human behavior and exploit them to make people do what you want them to do. These foundations will naturally come up throughout the rest of the book, but since you already know how they fit together and what they all mean individually, this should make the rest of the book a breeze to you. Think back to the 4th foundation, neuroscience. The more connections you make between the ideas within these pages, the easier you will be able to learn all of it. The 7 foundations of emotional manipulation tie the whole book together. With them solidly in your memory, the rest of our lessons should be relatively easy for you, even though there is still plenty for you to learn. Our next chapter will go deeper into mind control. Mind control is specifically the aspect of emotional manipulation in which we plant a new belief in the subject's mind. This involves controlling the subject's emotional state, employing a few psychology concepts, something called social framing, and more. Keep reading to get even deeper into the field of emotional manipulation.